The first thing Elias noticed about Jarl Harold was not his size, though he was enormous, or his scars, though they were many, or even the cold gray of his eyes, which seemed to see through flesh and bone and into the very soul of a man. The first thing Elias noticed was that Harold looked tired, not the tiredness of a man who had not slept, but the tiredness of a man who had stopped believing that anything in the world was worth waking up for. Elias had seen that look before. He had seen it in his father's eyes after his mother died. He had seen it in the eyes of the old men who survived battles when their sons did not. It was the look of someone who had lost too much and was too weary to hope for anything better. Elias was 19 winters old, the youngest son of a minor chieftain whose lands lay along the contested border between the southern kingdoms and the northern wilds. His people had been farmers and herders, not warriors, and when the Viking warband had swept through their valley, there had been no hope of victory. Elias's father had died with a sword in his hand, which was more than most could say. His mother had died years before, of a fever that had no cure. His brothers had scattered, and Elias did not know if any of them still lived. He had been captured not because he fought well, he had never been trained to fight, but because he had been too slow to run. Now he knelt in the mud with 9 other prisoners, their hands bound, their heads bowed, while the warriors of the warband formed a circle around them. The camp was built on a hill overlooking a wide river, its tents and longhouses arranged in defensive rings around a central fire pit. The smoke rose in thick columns, gray against the pale autumn sky. The air smelled of wood smoke and roasting meat, and the sharp metallic tang of blood that never quite washed away from a warrior's camp. The prisoners had been stripped of their weapons and their dignity, and they waited in silence for whatever fate the Viking chieftain had in store for them. Harold emerged from the largest tent, and the warriors fell silent. He was taller than any man Elias had ever seen, easily 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders and a chest that looked like it had been carved from oak. His hair was a mix of black and silver, cropped short against his skull, and his beard was thick and streaked with gray. But it was his face that drew the eye, a web of scars that crossed his cheeks and forehead, the most prominent a deep furrow that ran from his left temple to his right jaw, as if someone had tried to split his head in two and failed. He wore a simple tunic of dark wool, a leather vest studded with iron rings, and a silver arm ring on his left wrist carved with runes that glinted in the firelight. In his right hand he carried a long-handled axe, its blade polished to a mirror shine. "This is the law of this warband," Harold said, his voice carrying across the silent camp. It was a deep voice, rough as gravel, but there was something underneath it, something that sounded like exhaustion or grief or both. "We do not keep prisoners who cannot earn their place. We do not feed mouths that do not feed us back. We do not waste time on the weak, the cowardly, or the useless." He walked slowly around the circle of prisoners, his gray eyes studying each face in turn. "You have been brought here because you survived the battle. That is something, but survival is not enough. You must prove that you are worth more than the air you breathe. You must prove that you deserve to live." One of the prisoners, a man older than the others, with gray in his beard and fear in his eyes, began to weep. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking, "I have children, I have a wife. Let me go and I will pay any ransom. I have gold, I have land." Harold stopped in front of him. He looked down at the weeping man with an expression that was impossible to read. "Gold," he said, as if tasting the word. "Land, these are things that can be taken, they are not proof of worth." He raised his axe and the weeping man screamed. But Harold did not strike. He simply held the blade in front of the man's face, letting him see his own reflection in the steel. "You are afraid," Harold said. "That is not a weakness. Fear keeps a man alive. But you are also desperate, and desperate men do foolish things. I cannot trust a man who begs for his life. A man who begs will betray you to save his own skin." He turned away and continued his circuit. "You will have a chance to prove your worth. 3 trials, the trial of the body, the trial of the mind, the trial of the heart. Pass all 3, and you will be given a place in this warband. Fail any one, and you will die. There are no second chances." The prisoners looked at one another, their faces pale. One of them, a young man no older than Elias, tried to run. He bolted for the tree line, his bound hands making him stumble, but he made it 10 paces before an axe buried itself in his back. He fell without a sound. Harold walked over to the body, pulled his axe free, and wiped the blade on the dead man's tunic. "That is what happens to cowards," he said. "Does anyone else wish to try?" No one moved, no one spoke. Harold nodded. "Good, then we begin." The trial of the body was simple in its brutality. The prisoners were taken to the edge of a dark forest, and each was given a heavy stone, 30 pounds of rough granite tied to a rope that they had to carry over their shoulders. "You will run through the forest," Harold said, pointing to a path that vanished into the trees. "The trail is marked with white cloth. Follow it to the end, where you will find a clearing with a red banner. The first 5 to reach the banner will live. The rest will die. There are traps in the forest. There are wolves. There are my warriors who have been instructed to hinder you in any way they see fit." He smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "You may begin." The prisoners ran. Elias did not run. He stood still for a moment, watching the others disappear into the trees, listening to their panicked breathing and the pounding of their feet. Then he looked down at the stone in his hands. 30 pounds was not heavy, not for a short distance, but the forest was large and the trail was long, and the other prisoners were spending their energy too quickly, running as if their lives depended on speed alone. Elias knew better. Speed killed. Speed made you careless. Speed made you miss the traps. He began to walk, not fast but steady. He carried the stone not on his shoulder, where it would throw off his balance, but cradled against his chest, where he could use its weight to help him navigate the uneven ground. He watched the white cloth markers, but he also watched the ground, the trees, the shadows. He saw the first trap before he stepped into it. A rope stretched across the path at ankle height, tied to a branch that would swing down and strike anyone who tripped. He stepped over it carefully and continued on. The forest was dark, the canopy thick enough to block out most of the sunlight. The air was cool and damp, and the smell of moss and decay filled his nostrils. He heard screams in the distance. One of the prisoners had fallen into a pit, or been caught by a warrior, or simply given up. He did not look back. He could not afford to look back. His own life was the only one he could save. He came to a stream, too wide to jump, too deep to wade through easily. The white markers continued on the other side, but there was no bridge. The other prisoners had tried to swim, but Elias could see one of them struggling in the current, his arms flailing, his stone dragging him under. Elias did not follow. He walked upstream until he found a fallen tree that stretched across the water, its trunk thick enough to support his weight. He crossed carefully, the stone balanced on his back, and dropped to the ground on the other side. He was still alive. He was still moving. He encountered wolves, 2 of them, lean and hungry, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. They circled him, snarling, their teeth bared. Elias did not run. He did not scream. He stood still, his heart pounding, and he stared into the eyes of the larger wolf. He did not know why, but he felt something pass between them. Not understanding, not friendship, but something like acknowledgement. The wolves lost interest and slipped back into the trees. Elias let out a breath he did not know he had been holding and continued on. He reached the clearing as the sun was beginning to set. The red banner fluttered in the evening breeze, and there were already 4 other prisoners there, panting, bleeding, but alive. Elias was the 5th. He dropped his stone, fell to his knees, and vomited into the grass. He had done it. He had survived. Harold was waiting in the clearing, his gray eyes fixed on Elias with an expression that was impossible to read. "You are not the fastest," the Jarl said. "You are not the strongest, but you are clever, and cleverness is its own kind of strength." He gestured to a warrior standing nearby. "Take him to the tent. Give him food and water. Tomorrow, the trial of the mind." That night Elias lay on a pile of furs in a small tent, his body aching, his mind racing. He had not slept properly in days, but sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of the man who had tried to run, the axe in his back, the silence of his fall. He saw the prisoner drowning in the stream, his mouth open in a silent scream. He saw the wolves, their yellow eyes, their bared teeth. And he saw Harold standing in the clearing, watching him with those cold gray eyes. What kind of man made others fight for their lives like this? What kind of man found entertainment in suffering? Elias did not know, but he knew that he would survive. He had to. He had not come this far to die in a Viking camp. The trial of the mind was different. The remaining prisoners, there were only 6 now, the others having failed the first trial, were led to a longhouse at the edge of the camp. The building was dark inside, the windows shuttered, the only light coming from a single candle burning on a table in the center of the room. On the walls, carved into the wooden planks, were words in the Old Norse tongue, runes and symbols that Elias could barely recognize. "You have until the candle burns out to find your way out of this room," Harold said from the doorway. "There are no traps, no warriors, no wolves, only the words on the walls and your own minds. Find the exit and you live, fail and you die." He closed the door, and the prisoners were left in darkness. The others panicked immediately. They ran to the walls, pounding on the wood, searching for hidden doors. They screamed and cursed and wept. One of them, a young man named Rurik, who could not have been more than 16, began to pray in a language Elias did not recognize. Elias did not move. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and he looked at the runes. He had learned to read as a child. His mother had insisted, even though most of the men in his village thought reading was a waste of time. "Words are power," she had told him. "The man who can read can see the future. The man who can read can speak to the dead. The man who can read is never truly alone." Elias had not believed her then. He believed her now. The runes were not random. They formed a story about a warrior who had been betrayed by his closest friend. The friend had sold him to their enemies, and the warrior had been tortured for days, but he had not broken. He had not given up the names of his comrades. In the end he had escaped, and he had hunted down the friend who had betrayed him. But when he found him, he did not kill him. He forgave him. And the friend, overcome with guilt, had taken his own life. The story ended with a question: what is stronger, the blade or the heart? Elias read the story aloud. His voice was quiet at first, hesitant, but it grew stronger as he went on. The other prisoners stopped their panicking and listened. When he finished, there was a click, and a section of the wall swung open, revealing a door that had been hidden there all along. Elias stood up, walked to the door, and stepped through into the fading light of evening. Harold was waiting for him, leaning against a tree with his arms crossed. "You can read," the Jarl said. It was not a question. "Yes," Elias said. "My mother taught me." Harold's gray eyes softened just for a moment. "My mother taught me too. She said reading was the only weapon that could never be taken away." He pushed off from the tree and walked toward Elias. The story on the wall. It was about me, about a man I trusted who sold me to my enemies, about the choice I made when I found him. His jaw tightened. "I did not forgive him. I killed him, and I have wondered every day since if I made the right choice." Elias looked up at the tall Viking, at the scars on his face, at the exhaustion in his eyes. "The story does not say that forgiveness is always right," Elias said. "It says that the heart is stronger than the blade. But strength can be used for many things. You chose to use yours for justice. That is not nothing." Harold stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. "Tomorrow," he called over his shoulder, "the trial of the heart. Do not disappoint me." The trial of the heart was held at dawn. The remaining prisoners, only Elias and Rurik now, the others having failed the second trial, were led to a cliff overlooking a rocky gorge. At the bottom of the gorge, trapped in a cage made of branches and rope, was a wolf. It was a large animal, gray and black, with a wound on its flank that had stained its fur red. It snarled and snapped at the bars of its cage, its yellow eyes wild with pain and fear. "This is your final test," Harold announced. He stood at the edge of the cliff, his axe in his hand, his gray eyes cold. "You will be lowered into the gorge. Each of you will be given a knife. The first to kill the wolf will live. The other will die, either by the wolf's teeth or by my blade. The choice is yours." Rurik began to cry. "I cannot," he sobbed. "I cannot kill a living creature. I have never even hunted. Please, I cannot." He looked at Elias, his eyes wide with desperation. "Help me. Please. I do not want to die." Elias looked at the wolf, he looked at the knife in his hand, he looked at Harold standing on the cliff watching him with those cold gray eyes. And then he did something that no one expected. He climbed down into the gorge without waiting for the rope. He dropped to the rocky floor, his knees buckling, and he walked toward the cage. The wolf snarled and lunged at the bars, its teeth snapping inches from his face. Elias did not flinch. He did not raise his knife. He sat down on the ground in front of the cage, crossed his legs, and began to sing. It was a lullaby, the same lullaby his mother had sung to him when he was small, when the world was still kind and his biggest fear was the dark. The melody was simple, almost childlike, and his voice was soft and unsteady. But as he sang, something happened. The wolf stopped snarling. Its ears pricked forward, and it tilted its head, watching Elias with those yellow eyes. Slowly, cautiously, it lay down on the floor of its cage, its head resting on its paws. Elias reached through the bars and touched the wolf's flank. The animal whimpered, but did not bite. Elias used his knife to cut the ropes that bound the cage, and the wolf limped out, free for the first time in days. It looked at Elias for a long moment, then turned and loped away into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. The gorge was silent. Rurik was staring at Elias with his mouth open. The warriors who had gathered to watch were frozen, their axes forgotten in their hands.
And Harold was walking down the path to the gorge, his face pale, his grey eyes wide. "Why?" the Jarl asked when he reached Elias. His voice was rough, almost angry. "Why did you not kill it? You could have won. You could have lived. Instead, you let it go. You chose mercy over survival. Do you understand what you have done?" Elias stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at Harold, at the scars on his face, at the exhaustion in his eyes. "I understand," he said. "I understand that you have been asking the wrong question. You have been asking whether I am strong enough to kill. But the real question is whether I am strong enough not to. The wolf was not my enemy. It was a creature in pain, trapped and frightened. Killing it would have proved nothing except that I am willing to destroy something weaker than myself." He took a step closer to Harold. "You have been testing us to see if we are worthy of your warband, but you have forgotten to test yourself. Are you worthy of us?" The silence stretched between them like a blade. The warriors on the cliff held their breath. Harold's hand tightened on his axe. For a moment Elias thought the Jarl would strike him down, that his life would end here, in this rocky gorge, with the taste of blood and ash on his tongue. But Harold did not strike. He lowered his axe, and something shifted in his grey eyes, something that looked like the first crack in a wall of ice. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met," Harold said slowly, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Elias said. "My mother used to say that the bravest people are often the most foolish. It takes a kind of madness to believe that the world can be better than it is." Harold stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was not a wide smile, not a joyful smile, but it was real. "You have passed the trial of the heart," he said, "not because you killed the wolf, because you chose not to." He turned to his warriors. "This man is no longer a prisoner. He is one of us. He has earned his place." The warriors murmured among themselves, but no one objected. Rurik, still trembling, was helped out of the gorge by two of the older fighters. Elias stood alone at the bottom of the cliff, covered in dirt and sweat and the memory of the wolf's yellow eyes, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt hope. The weeks that followed were hard, but they were not cruel. Elias was given a small tent near the edge of the camp, a bed of furs, and a set of clothes that fit him better than the rags he had been wearing. He was put to work in the stables, caring for the horses, because Harold had noticed that he had a gentle way with animals. He helped the camp's healer prepare poultices and tinctures, grinding herbs and mixing potions with hands that were steadier than most. He learned the names of the warriors, their faces, their stories, and slowly, despite everything, he began to feel like he belonged. But it was Harold who drew his attention most. The Jarl was everywhere, watching from the high seat, walking through the camp, training in the yard. He was a hard man, demanding and exacting, but he was not cruel. He punished laziness but rewarded effort. He did not tolerate cowardice, but he respected honesty. And he watched Elias. Always he watched Elias. One evening, after a long day of training, Harold found Elias sitting by the river that ran past the camp. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and gold, and the air was cool and clean. Harold sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You have been here for a month," the Jarl said. "You have not tried to escape. You have not caused trouble. Why?" Elias looked at the water, at the way it flowed past without stopping, without looking back. "Because I have nowhere else to go," he said. "My family is dead, my home is ash, the people I grew up with are scattered or gone. This camp is the first place I have felt not alone, not entirely." He turned to look at Harold. "And because of you. You gave me a chance when you did not have to. You let me live when you could have killed me. I do not forget things like that." Harold was silent for a long moment. The only sounds were the lapping of the water and the distant murmur of the camp. "I killed the man who betrayed me," he said finally. "I hunted him down and I killed him with my bare hands. I thought it would make me feel better. I thought it would fill the hole in my chest. But it did not. It only made the hole bigger." He looked at Elias, his grey eyes soft in the fading light. "You asked me in the gorge whether I was worthy of my warband. I have been thinking about that question ever since. I do not know the answer, but I know that I want to be. I want to be worthy of something, of someone." Elias's heart pounded. He turned to face Harold fully, and for the first time he noticed how close they were. Close enough to see the small scar above the Jarl's eyebrow, close enough to count the flecks of silver in his hair. "You are worthy," Elias said. "You are worthy because you are trying, because you are willing to change, because you looked at a prisoner and saw a person, not a thing." He reached out and touched Harold's face, his fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "That is more than most men ever do." Harold's breath caught. He leaned into Elias's touch, his eyes closing. "I have not been touched with kindness in years," he whispered. "I had forgotten what it felt like." He opened his eyes and looked at Elias, and there was something in his gaze that made Elias's stomach flutter. "Stay with me tonight. Not as a prisoner, not as a warrior, as something more." Elias did not answer with words. He leaned forward and kissed Harold softly, tentatively, a question rather than a demand. Harold's hand came up to cup the back of his head, and the kiss deepened, and for a moment the world fell away. There was only the river, the sunset, and the warmth of two broken people learning to be whole together. But not everyone was happy. A warrior named Gunnar, who had served Harold for nearly a decade, watched the growing closeness between the Jarl and the former prisoner with cold, jealous eyes. He had always been Harold's right hand, his most trusted advisor, and he resented the way Elias had inserted himself into their world. "He is a spy," Gunnar whispered to the other warriors. "He is using the Jarl. He will betray us the first chance he gets." Some believed him, some did not, but the seeds of doubt were planted. One night, Gunnar made his move. He claimed that Elias had been caught stealing gold from the war chest. He produced witnesses, men who owed him favours, and demanded that Elias be put on trial. Harold was torn. He did not want to believe the accusations, but he could not ignore them. The law of the warband was clear. A thief paid with his life. "I will investigate," Harold said, his voice cold. "If Elias is guilty, he will be punished. If he is innocent, the one who accused him falsely will be punished." He looked at Gunnar, and his grey eyes were hard. "Are you sure of your accusations?" Gunnar did not flinch. "I am sure," he said. The investigation took 3 days. Harold questioned the witnesses, examined the gold, searched Elias's tent. He found nothing. No evidence, no motive, no confession. But he also found that the witnesses had been given gifts by Gunnar, silver rings, fine cloth, promises of favour. The truth was clear, but Harold did not want to believe it. Gunnar had been his friend for years. They had fought side by side, bled together, lost friends together. To accuse him of betrayal was to accuse himself of blindness. Elias watched the conflict play out on Harold's face. He saw the pain, the doubt, the fear, and he made a choice. "I will take a blood oath," Elias announced to the gathered warband.
"I will swear on the runes of my mother and the grave of my father that I am innocent, and if I am lying, let the gods strike me down." He walked to the center of the circle and knelt, his hands open at his sides. "I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to fear. The truth will set me free." Gunnar laughed. "Blood oaths mean nothing. Anyone can speak words." Elias looked up at him and his eyes were calm. "Then let the gods decide. A trial by combat. You and me. If I win, you admit your lies. If you win, I die. Either way, the truth comes out." The camp erupted in murmurs. Gunnar was a warrior, a seasoned fighter with years of experience. Elias was barely more than a boy, untrained, unarmed. The outcome was certain. But Harold saw something in Elias's eyes that made him pause. He saw not desperation but determination. Not fear but fire. "I will allow it," Harold said. "The trial will be at dawn." That night Harold came to Elias's tent. The boy was sitting in the dark, his hands folded in his lap, his face calm. "You cannot win," Harold said. "Gunnar has killed 12 men in single combat. You have never killed anyone." Elias looked up at him. "I know," he said, "but I do not have to win. I only have to survive." "What is the difference?" Elias smiled, a small, sad smile. "Winning means killing him. Surviving means living long enough for the truth to come out." He stood up and walked to Harold, taking the Jarl's hands in his own. "I am not afraid of dying. I have been afraid my whole life, of the dark, of the cold, of being alone. But I am not afraid of Gunnar. He is just a man. And men can be beaten even by boys if the boys are clever enough." Harold pulled him into an embrace, holding him tight. "I will not let you die," he whispered. "If he tries to kill you, I will stop the fight. I will sacrifice my honor to save your life." Elias pulled back and looked at him. "Do not," he said. "Your honor is all you have. Do not throw it away for me." He kissed Harold softly. "I will be fine. Trust me." The trial by combat was held in the training yard, surrounded by the entire warband. Gunnar was armed with a sword and shield, his face twisted with rage. Elias was given a short knife and a promise from Harold that no one would interfere. "Fight," Harold said, his voice hollow. "May the gods show us the truth." Gunnar attacked immediately, swinging his sword in wide, brutal arcs. Elias did not try to block. He dodged and weaved, using his smaller size to stay out of reach. He did not strike back. He simply survived. The warriors watched in confusion. "Fight," they shouted. "Stop running. Coward." But Elias did not listen. He kept moving, kept dodging, kept surviving. And as the minutes passed, Gunnar grew tired. His swings became slower, sloppier. His breath came in ragged gasps, and Elias saw his moment. He did not attack. He spoke. "Why did you do it, Gunnar?" he asked, his voice carrying across the yard. "Why did you lie? Was it jealousy, fear, or just hatred of someone different from you?" Gunnar roared and lunged, but his sword went wide. Elias stepped inside his guard and pressed the knife to his throat. "Answer me," he said. "Tell the truth, and I will let you live." Gunnar's eyes were wild. "Because you are nothing," he spat. "You are a prisoner, a nobody, a piece of dirt. You do not deserve his love. You do not deserve his trust. I have served him for 10 years, and he never looked at me the way he looks at you." His voice cracked. "I wanted you gone. I wanted you dead. So I lied." The yard was silent. Harold stepped forward, his face pale. "You heard him," he said to the warband. "Gunnar has confessed. Elias is innocent." He turned to Gunnar, and his gray eyes were cold. "You are banished. Leave this camp by nightfall. If I ever see your face again, I will kill you myself." Gunnar dropped his sword and walked away, his head bowed. No one stopped him. No one said a word. That night, Harold and Elias stood on the cliff where the trial of the heart had taken place. The stars were bright overhead and the wind was cool against their faces. "You were right," Harold said. "You did not have to win. You only had to survive." He turned to look at Elias. "How did you know?" Elias shrugged. "I did not know. I hoped." He took Harold's hand. "You have been testing people your whole life, looking for worth, looking for value. But worth is not something you find. It is something you create together." He squeezed the Jarl's fingers. "I am not the same person I was when I was captured, and you are not the same person you were when you captured me. We have grown, we have changed, we have earned each other." Harold pulled him close and kissed him, deep and slow and full of promise. The stars shone, and the wind whispered, and the world felt impossibly large and impossibly small at the same time. "You have earned your place," Harold said when they finally parted, "not in my warband, in my heart." Elias smiled. "That is all I ever wanted.